Hi, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas, on Friday, November the 10th. And tomorrow, November the 11th, is Veterans Day. So we want to say Happy Veterans Day in advance, a few hours in advance, but nevertheless, Happy Veterans Day to all the veterans in the audience. One of the great holidays of the year when we remember the men and women who wore the uniform of the United States. So it's just a great holiday. If you are not familiar with the story of Veterans Day, it actually goes back to World War One. November 11th was the day that war ended, and ever since we have designated November 11th as Veterans Day. Now it's a little bit longer than that. I've given you kind of a very brief history of it, but it does have something to do with World War One. November 11th. I think it's November 11th at the 11th hour. I think something like that. Very interesting story. I would encourage you to read a little bit about it. But as far as I'm concerned, it's one of the great holidays, Veterans Day. What else? What else can you say? I have a post over at the American Thinker Friday morning, and it's more of the sanctuary city blues. What is happening across the country is that more and more Democrat cities and Democrat politicians are starting to basically come to terms with the reality that they cannot handle all the migrants. The latest one that I referred to in my post is the governor of Massachusetts, a very liberal lady who was all in favor of sanctuary cities, I guess, before people came. And now she's basically saying, look, we don't have any room. We don't have any room. In fact, she's telling people to go somewhere else. Go somewhere else. Don't come to Massachusetts. And it's just, again, it's very typical of what's happening in many of these sanctuary cities, whether it's New York and now Boston. And what many of these mayors want to do or governors want to do is that they want the federal government to bail them out. Basically, that's what it's all about. They want the federal government to bail them out by sending them money so that they can just pay for this without having to address the real issue. Of course, the real issue is not money. The real issue is the border policy that has allowed 5, 6, 5 million, whatever the number is, of people to come into the United States in these circumstances. And the country was not ready for this. The country was not ready for an inflow of people of this magnitude. It has created not just problems in New York, but really problems everywhere because you cannot absorb that many people that quickly. 5 million people, that's the population of more people, I think, than Louisiana or Oklahoma or Arkansas. I mean, it's simply too many people coming in too quickly. And that, of course, has created this terrible mess. And the sanctuary city blues, as I refer to it in my post. So check it out over at the American Thinker. There are also some very interesting new polls that are coming out, and you're starting to see now a tendency in these polls. As I've always told you, polls are, you don't want to bank too much in one poll or another because these things change and it's all based on the sample or the questions. So I've always taken polls seriously to a point. But I do look at the tendency. In other words, I look at the trend because that's the more important thing. What is the trend? What are the polls saying for the last few months? And what we're seeing is two things. Number one, President Trump is leading President Biden pretty much across the board. If you look at the last 20, 30, 50 polls, when they go head to head, President Trump is winning. Now, it's within the margin of error. So let's not get too excited. It's within the margin of error in the popular vote. But nevertheless, he is leading President Biden. The other thing, and we've seen this now a couple of times here in the last couple of weeks, where when you go state by state and when you look at some of these so-called swing states, President Trump is winning again. For example, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Nevada, Arizona. Those 5 states would flip right now if if the election was held. Now, what would be the consequence of that? That Trump would win the election because all of those electoral votes, of course, would go to President Trump and he would win the electoral college. So this is what's happening. More and more people are rejecting the presidency of Joe Biden. Now, another thing that I would caution people about is that many of these bad polls are not necessarily a yearning for Trump. Now, don't misunderstand what I'm saying. I think Trump did a good job as president. But what I'm trying to tell you is that there's many of these negative polls are as much a rejection of Joe Biden as anything else, because a lot of people are just very disenchanted with his time as president. I mean, if you look at all the major issues, he's underwater in just about everything, whether it's the economy, whether it's the border, foreign policy. I mean, there's just a great disenchantment with what he's doing as president, and that explains, I think, many of these polls. Now, it's not that they necessarily love Trump, but they clearly dislike President Biden. So I think you got to read these polls carefully. And it's still going to be, I think, a tough battle no matter what happens in 2024, because the Democrats are going to play the abortion card. Get ready for that. Get ready for that. The Democrats are really going to play the abortion card to get around all these other issues, because they want to get some of the young people to vote. And one of the ways they get them to vote is by talking about abortion. So you got to be ready. The Democrats are going to be playing the abortion card. The Republicans better be ready for it. And they're going to have to come up with a very practical answer when it comes to abortion. And the answer is you don't want to have a ban, meaning you don't want to say that a woman cannot have an abortion. What you want to say is that there has to be a right to an abortion, but at the same time, it has to be within certain time limits. I think that's the solution. And Nikki Haley, the other night in that debate, I thought explained it as well as anybody. She said, look, it's a personal decision. But you have to be willing to be compassionate about it. So my feeling, on a personal level, I oppose abortion. But as a practical matter, as a policy matter, I think you have to be willing to say, okay, we're going to have a window where you can have an abortion 10 weeks, 15 weeks, 12 weeks, whatever the consensus is. And then from there on, no late-term abortion. Now, the other thing, too, that is happening, and that is that once you send abortion back to the states, you're going to have a lot of different solutions to abortion. For example, Ohio. In Ohio, they just recently approved a constitutional amendment basically guaranteeing a woman's right to an abortion. Well, that's to be expected in many states, because in many states, women are saying, we're not for abortion, but we do not think it's right for the government to ban abortion under any circumstances. So there's going to have to be some negotiating. The Republicans are going to have to be smart when it comes to abortion. But again, you got to understand the Democrats want to do nothing but talk about abortion in 2024. That's all they want to talk about is abortion, abortion, abortion. And we're going to have to be ready to deflect those attacks and then force the Democrats to talk about the economy and the border and everything else, which is where the Republicans are leading as far as the American people on the election. One big political story that the last 24 hours is that Senator Manchin of West Virginia has decided that he's not going to run for re-election. Now, that's not a shock, because he was not going to be reelected in West Virginia. He simply has no path to re-election. So that means that seat in West Virginia is going to flip Republican in 2024. So that's a good news. That's good news to say the least. And there are other possibilities for the Republicans as well. Montana, Ohio, there's a couple of possibilities there. But the larger question is, what is Senator Manchin going to do now? Because if you listen to the little speech that he gave, it was a good speech. I liked it. I think he's clearly talking about looking to run for president. That's how it came across to me. And I think he would run for president as an independent. There's a party out there called the No Labels Party. And I think I can see very clearly Senator Manchin running as the candidate of the No Labels Party as an alternative to both parties, simply saying both parties are not doing the job. Let us in the middle, or the independents, or whatever they call themselves, do it. I don't think he can win that way. I just don't think that there are enough people in the middle to elect a third-party candidate. But I do think a third-party candidate would take votes away from the Democrat or the Republican. So the net effect of a third party candidate, and then when you add Robert F. Kennedy to that mix as well, I think that's going to hurt the Democrats. By the way, Manchin and Kennedy are going to hurt the Democrats more than the Republicans or Trump. But again, that's all in the future. That's just my impression about that right now. A couple of things as we close today, a couple of things on this day in history. We say happy number 248 to the U.S. Marines, one of the great organizations of all time. The Marines became official on this day in 1775. So happy number 248 to the Marines. And, you know, we say goodbye to a real personality of the 20th century, and that's Frank Borman, who passed away the last couple of days. Frank was 95 years old. You probably remember Frank Borman because he was one of the three men who was on Apollo 8 when they went around the moon for the first time. You may remember that they read from the book of Genesis all the way up in space on Christmas Eve, 1968. After Apollo 8, Frank Borman became the president of Eastern Airlines. And that's probably how many people remember him, doing those commercials that he used to do for Eastern Airlines. So Frank Borman, one of the great Americans of the 20th century, passed away in the last couple of days, 95 years old, great career. And we certainly thank him for his service in the U.S. Navy as well as in the space program. He was one of the pioneers. He was one of the, I'm not sure if he was part of that Right Stuff group that started this, but he was certainly one of the early ones. And I do think he went not just on the Apollo program, but I think he was also part of the Gemini program, which is the other program of that time in the space program. So rest in peace, Mr. Frank Borman, great American, great individual, great patriot. And I love those commercials he used to make for Eastern Airlines. I bet a lot of people remember him for that as well. Have a great weekend, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas. Go Cowboys. They've got a big game coming up on Sunday. They should win, but you never know in the NFL. The team that is supposed to win doesn't always win, as we know. Bye-bye, everybody. Have a great weekend.